Get him off this floor now. The CEO's voice cut through the polished executive corridor like a blade. Executives froze mid-step as she pointed directly at the quiet maintenance workers standing near the glass boardroom doors. This area is restricted. Vivian Harcourt snapped, her heels echoing against marble. And you're fired. A few staff members chuckled awkwardly. Someone whispered that the janitor must have gotten lost again. The humiliation spread fast in the corridor where power lived and reputations were built. The man she dismissed didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he simply nodded once, calm, steady, almost patient. And minutes later, something happened that made the entire floor fall silent because the CEO's own daughter would run straight into his arms. This story isn't really about a man losing his job. It's about what happens when power mistakes quiet strength for weakness. Before we reach the exact moment when the CEO realizes the man she fired is the only person who can save her building, remember something important. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Because the truth about that quiet maintenance worker wasn't what anyone in that corridor believed. Marcus Hale stood exactly where security told him to stand, hands relaxed at his sides, shoulders straight, expression unreadable. The laughter and whispers didn't seem to land on him the way they might on someone else. He'd heard worse, a lot worse. Vivian Harcourt watched him with sharp impatience, arms folded over the tailored gray blazer that probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 months. You shouldn't even be on this floor, she said again, her tone colder now. Security will escort you out. Marcus nodded once. Yes, ma'am. No anger, no protest, just quiet acceptance. That response somehow irritated her more than if he had argued. The executive floor of Harcourt Technologies Tower stretched in gleaming lines of glass and steel. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered beneath a pale winter sun. Inside, the air smelled faintly of espresso and polished marble. It was a world built for people like Vivian, not people like him. Security Director Daniel Ruark stepped forward, clearing his throat. Sir, we'll need you to come with us. Marcus moved without resistance. As he turned toward the elevator bank, the executives behind the CEO resumed their conversations. Unbelievable. How did he even get up here? These service staff, their voices faded behind him. But Marcus heard every word. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. He stepped inside with Rourke, the hum of the descending car filling the silence. Rourke studied him for a moment. You really shouldn't have come up here, the security director said quietly. The CEO hates surprises. Marcus looked at the digital floor numbers dropping one by one. I know, Rourke frowned slightly. You know, Marcus didn't explain. He simply watched the doors open onto the service level where the building's hidden machinery lived. The contrast between floors was stark. Upstairs, glass walls, executive lounges, and quiet luxury. Down here, humming generators, concrete corridors, and the metallic scent of oil. Marcus stepped out. His locker sat near the maintenance station beside racks of tools worn smooth by years of use. A small photo magnet held a picture against the metal door. A little girl with bright eyes and tangled brown hair grinned at the camera, missing one front tooth, Sophie, his daughter. Marcus opened the locker and placed his work gloves inside with careful precision. The movements were methodical, almost ritualistic. Rourke lingered nearby. You've worked here almost a year, the security director said. Never caused problems before. Marcus shrugged slightly. Still didn't. Rourke almost smiled, but the moment passed when an alarm somewhere deep in the building gave a faint, unfamiliar chirp. Marcus's head turned instantly, not toward the loud machinery, toward the quiet control panel above the electrical rack. A single red indicator blinked once, then went dark. Rourke didn't notice, but Marcus did. His eyes narrowed slightly. Something wrong? Rowe asked. Marcus shook his head. Maybe nothing. Yet his gaze lingered on the panel a moment longer than necessary. He'd spent the last year learning this building the same way he learned every environment he entered, mapping exits, systems, weak points. Not because it was his job, because it was habit. A habit that had once kept entire teams alive. Rourke finally clapped a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Sorry about today, he said. Bad timing. Marcus gave a faint, almost amused smile. Timing's funny like that. As Rourke walked away, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded drawing Sophie had given him that morning. A crayon sketch of a tall building and two stick figures standing in front of it. One big, one small. He slipped the drawing back into his pocket. Above them, several floors higher, something inside Heartwarming Tower shifted again. The same warning indicator blinked red. This time it stayed on. Marcus saw it immediately. And this time he didn't ignore it. Marcus didn't ignore the red light. He stepped closer to the control panel. The faint hum of the electrical room vibrating through the concrete floor beneath his boots. The indicator blinked steadily now. Slow, deliberate pulses. That meant something deeper in the tower wasn't behaving the way it should. Most people in the building would have walked past it. Most maintenance workers would have filed a routine report. Marcus didn't. His fingers hovered near the panel without touching it. Eyes scanning the small display screen beneath the blinking light. Lines of system data rolled quietly across the monitor. Voltage readings, pressure levels, automated safety protocols. None of it looked dramatic, but something about the pattern wasn't right. A soft metallic clank echoed somewhere deeper in the maintenance level, followed by the distant whir of ventilation turbines adjusting their speed. Marcus exhaled slowly. Yeah, that's not good. The system reset itself suddenly. The red light vanished as if nothing had happened. For a moment, the panel returned to normal. Anyone else would have shrugged and moved on. Marcus didn't move. His instincts told him the building had just whispered a warning. Footsteps approached from the corridor. One of the daytime technicians, a young guy named Matteo, walked in carrying a crate of replacement filters. Hey, Matteo said casually, heard about the executive floor thing. Marcus leaned back against the workbench. News travels fast. Matteo laughed. Man, the CEO firing someone in front of the whole leadership team, that's going to spread through this building before lunch. Marcus didn't respond. He simply grabbed a rag and wiped grease from his hands. Matteo hesitated. You okay, though? Marcus nodded. Yeah. Matteo studied him carefully. You're weirdly calm for someone who just lost their job. Marcus shrugged again. Got a kid waiting for me tonight. Can't bring home a bad mood with the groceries. Matteo shook his head with a grin. Still don't get you sometimes, man. Marcus smiled faintly, but said nothing. The maintenance room door slid open again, and Daniel Rohr stepped back inside. The security director looked more tense now than he had earlier. You still here? Rourke asked. Cleaning up my locker, Marcus said. Rohr rubbed the back of his neck. Listen, off the record, the CEO's been under pressure lately. Investors, board members, all that stuff. When she gets stressed, she tends to overreact. Marcus tilted his head slightly. That what we're calling it? Rourke sighed. Look, I'm not defending it. I'm just saying she's not usually that harsh. Marcus didn't bother responding. His attention had drifted back to the electrical panel. The red light blinked again, this time longer. Rourke noticed Marcus staring. What is it? Probably nothing, Marcus said quietly. Matteo leaned over the console. All systems look normal. Marcus watched the readings carefully. Then he pointed at a line of numbers. See that? Matteo squinted. Pressure fluctuation in the coolant line, maybe. Marcus nodded once. Matteo shrugged. Buildings old happen sometimes. Marcus didn't argue, but the tension in his shoulders remained above them. 40 floors higher, the executive level buzzed with activity as Vivian Harcourt moved through her schedule like a storm cutting across glass offices. Her assistant hurried beside her. The Singapore investors are already waiting in the conference suite, the assistant said nervously. They can wait another 2 minutes, Vivian replied sharply. She stepped into the elevator, pressing the penthouse conference button. The door slid shut with a quiet hiss. Inside the elevator, standing quietly near the corner rail, was a small girl holding a tablet and a backpack decorated with glittery stars. Vivian blinked in surprise. Leela. Her daughter looked up from the screen. Hi, Mom. Vivian's expression softened slightly. What are you doing up here? You're supposed to stay in the reception lounge with Nora. She went to get coffee, Leela said casually. Vivian sighed. This building is not a playground. Leela shrugged. It's boring down there. Vivian checked her watch. I have a meeting. Stay close to Nora when she gets back. The elevator doors opened onto the conference floor. Vivian stepped out quickly, heels clicking across polished marble as executives rose to greet her. Behind her, unnoticed in the shifting crowd, Leela slipped out of the elevator and wandered toward the glass staircase leading to the lobby. Down in the maintenance level, Marcus was pulling his jacket from the locker when the red warning light flashed violently across the panel. This time, the alarm came with it. A deep metallic siren began echoing through the concrete corridors. Matteo froze. What the hell? The lights flickered. Emergency systems kicked in instantly. Rowarch's radio crackled with urgent voices. Security to all units. Possible structural failure warning on level 14. Marcus's head snapped up. He didn't hesitate. He moved fast. And for the first time since the CEO had fired him that morning, Marcus Hale stopped acting like a janitor. Before we see what happens next, subscribe with the bell on if you enjoy stories where quiet strength changes music, everything. Because the people everyone overlooks are often the ones holding the whole world together. Marcus moved before anyone else in the room fully understood what the alarm meant. The deep mechanical siren pulsed through the maintenance level, vibrating through pipes and steel beams. Overhead lights flickered as emergency power shifted across the building systems. Matteo stared at the flashing panel. Structural warning on 14, he said. That doesn't make sense. Marcus was already pulling a flashlight from the wall rack. Ventilation coolant line runs through 14, he said calmly. If pressure spikes there, it stresses the support frame. Matteo blinked. How do you? But Marcus was already heading for the corridor. Rourke followed, speaking urgently into his radio. Control, confirm that alert. Is this a system error? The voice from Security Command crackled back. Negative. Sensors show abnormal. Vibration in the east structural column. Marcus stopped mid-stride east column that ran directly through the lobby core and the executive elevators. His mind began mapping the tower instantly. 40 floors of steel and concrete arranged like a familiar blueprint in his head. Pressure imbalance. Cooling failure. Structural stress. If the wrong systems locked at the wrong moment, parts of the tower could trap hundreds of people inside. Where's the CEO right now? Marcus asked. Rourke frowned. Penthouse conference suite. Marcus nodded. In the lobby. Rourke checked his tablet. Busy as usual. Marcus exhaled slowly. That's going to change. The alarm shifted tone suddenly lower, more urgent. Matteo's face went pale. That sound means automatic containment is about to lock elevator access. Rourke swore under his breath. If people are in transit when that hits, they'll get stuck between floors. Marcus finished quietly. For a brief moment, all three men stood still, listening to the echoing siren rolling through the building. Rourke turned toward Marcus. You just got fired, the security director said. You don't have to be involved in this. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket and glanced at the lock screen. A photo of Sophie smiled back at him. Missing tooth, messy hair, that crooked grin she always wore when she tried to draw skyscrapers bigger than the page. Marcus slipped the phone back into his jacket. Kids in the building? He asked. Rowe hesitated. Yes, CEO's daughter is here today. Marcus nodded once. Then we move. They hurried toward the service elevator. Above them, the tower buzzed with growing confusion. Office workers stepped into hallways. Assistants stared at flashing emergency notices on their monitors. Security guards rushed toward designated stations. But no one yet understood the real problem. The service elevator doors opened with a metallic clang. Marcus stepped inside first. Rourke hit the button for level 14. The car lurched upward. Inside the elevator, the tension thickened with every passing floor. Matteo rubbed his temples. This is insane, he muttered. We should wait for engineering. Marcus shook his head slightly. Engineering teams are 20 minutes out. Rourke glanced at him. How do you know that? Marcus answered without looking away from the glowing floor numbers. City traffic. Emergency dispatch pattern. Closest structural unit comes from the west side. Rourke frowned again. You've thought about this before. Marcus didn't reply. The elevator slowed suddenly at level 12, then shuddered. Lights flickered. Matteo grabbed the rail. Please don't stop. Please don't stop. The elevator resumed climbing. When the doors opened on 14, a wave of hot mechanical air rushed inside. Marcus stepped out. The corridor lights blinked unevenly. A faint grinding noise echoed from somewhere behind the walls. He walked directly toward the maintenance access panel beside the east structural column. Rourke and Matteo followed. Marcus crouched and opened the panel with quick practiced movements. Inside, coolant pipes trembled violently. A thin jet of vapor hissed from a fractured joint. Matteo's jaw dropped. How did you know exactly where to look? Marcus studied the damage carefully. Pressure imbalance started here, he said. Rourke leaned closer. Can you fix it? Marcus hesitated. Then he slowly closed the panel. This isn't the main problem, Matteo blinked. What do you mean? Marcus stood. The coolant line failure triggered stress sensors, but the real danger is what the building's safety system will do next. Rourke's voice tightened. What will it do? Marcus looked toward the stairwell doors at the end of the corridor. It'll lock down sections of the tower automatically, he said. And if that happens while the structural frame is under uneven pressure, he paused. Matteo swallowed. Then what? Marcus met Rourke's eyes. The building could trap hundreds of people in the wrong places. A loud metallic boom echoed from somewhere above them. Dust drifted from the ceiling vents. Rourke grabbed his radio. All units, this is Director Roarwark. Initiate controlled evacuation immediately. Static answered him. Then a voice from command shouted through the radio. Too late. Lockdown sequence has started. Marcus looked up toward the upper floors. Somewhere above them, people were already trapped. And in the lobby far below, a small girl had just wandered away from the reception desk. Too late. The lockdown sequence has started. The words crackled through Rourke's radio and hung in the hot air of the corridor. For a moment, no one spoke. The tower groaned again, deep and metallic, like a ship straining under pressure. Matteo wiped sweat from his forehead. Lockdown means the security grid sealing floors automatically. Right. Rourke nodded grimly. Elevators halt. Fire doors close. Stairwells restrict movement to prevent spread of damage. Marcus stared down the hallway, listening to the building the way some people listen to storms. He could feel the vibration through the soles of his boots now. Not catastrophic, but escalating. How long before the structural load evens out? Roar asked. Marcus shook his head. It won't. Matteo's voice cracked. What do you mean it won't? Marcus walked back to the maintenance panel and opened it again. The coolant pipe continued hissing quietly, vapor curling into the air. This system isn't stabilizing pressure, he said. It's redistributing it. Roar frowned. Explain. Marcus pointed upward. Upper floors are pushing weight into the east column. Lockdown seals ventilation paths that normally relieve that stress. Matteo blinked slowly. So the building's trapping its own pressure. Marcus nodded once. Exactly. Rourke's jaw tightened. And if it keeps building, Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed the panel again and stood. Then he spoke quietly. Then somewhere in this tower, something's going to fail. Rourke cursed under his breath and grabbed his radio again. Command override lockdown protocol. Static answered him. Then the same strained voice returned. Negative. System override requires CEO authorization. Rourke froze. Of course it did. Vivian Harcourt had designed the building security structure herself after a high-profile corporate breach 2 years earlier. Nothing bypassed executive authority. Marcus glanced at Rourke. She's in the penthouse conference suite, right? Rourke nodded. Marcus looked toward the stairwell. That's 40 floors up. Matteo stared at him. You're not serious. Marcus pushed the stairwell door open. Cold concrete air rushed out. Elevators are locking down, Marcus said calmly. Stairs are the only path. Rourke grabbed his arm. You just got fired this morning. Marcus looked at him. I remember. You don't owe this company anything. Marcus's expression stayed steady. I'm not doing it for the company. He started climbing the stairs. Rourke hesitated only a second before following. Matteo groaned. Oh, great. Cardio during a structural emergency. He chased after them. The stairwell echoed with the pounding of their footsteps as they climbed. Each landing smelled faintly of dust and old concrete. Emergency lights flickered along the walls, casting red shadows that stretched across the steps. Marcus climbed with quiet efficiency. Not rushing, not slowing, just steady. Rourke noticed it quickly. You're not even breathing hard, he said between steps. Marcus shrugged slightly. Old habit. Matteo panted behind them. What kind of maintenance worker trains like this? Marcus didn't answer. They reached the 20th floor landing when the building shuddered again, harder this time. The stairwell lights flickered violently. Somewhere above them, a loud metallic crash echoed. Rourke grabbed the railing. What was that? Marcus listened. His eyes narrowed slightly. Ventilation brace probably snapped. Matteo looked horrified. That sounds bad. It is, Marcus said. They continued climbing. Halfway up the next flight, Roarwark's radio crackled again. Security director respond. Roarwark grabbed it. This is Rourke. The voice from command sounded panicked. We've lost access to the lobby feed. Marcus stopped climbing instantly. Rourke frowned. What happened? Camera system shut down when lockdown started, the voice said. But we had visual on the CEO's daughter before that. Rourke's stomach dropped. And now we don't know where she is. Marcus slowly turned his head. What do you mean you don't know? Last sighting was the lobby staircase 15 minutes ago. Rourke ran a hand over his face. She must have wandered off. Matteo whispered, oh man. Marcus stared down the stairwell toward the lower floors. The building vibrated again. A faint grinding noise rolled through the steel beams like distant thunder. Rourke noticed Marcus's expression change. What? Marcus spoke quietly. Lobby sits directly under the east structural column. Matteo blinked. The same column that's taking all the pressure. Marcus nodded once. Silence filled the stairwell. Rourke swore. We need to find her. Marcus turned around immediately. Not upward, downward. Rourke grabbed his arm again. The CEO overeyed. Marcus met his eyes. If that column shifts, the lobby becomes the most dangerous place in the building. Rourke understood instantly and released his grip. They began running down the stairs fast. Concrete echoed under their pounding boots. Somewhere far below, a small girl wandered through the enormous marble lobby, staring curiously at flickering lights and empty security desks. She didn't understand the alarms. She only knew one thing. The quiet maintenance man she liked was usually somewhere down here, and if she found him, everything would feel safe again. The stairwell doors slammed open as Marcus burst onto the lower floors. His boots hit the concrete landing hard, momentum carrying him forward as Rourke and Matteo struggled to keep up behind him. The emergency lights painted everything in dim red pulses that matched the slow mechanical thudding of the building's lockdown system. Every few seconds, another door somewhere in the tower is sealed with a heavy metallic crash. Marcus slowed slightly at the next landing, tilting his head. Listening. Rourke noticed it immediately. What is it? Marcus didn't answer at first. His hand rested against the stairwell wall, fingers lightly touching the vibrating concrete. The tower was speaking again. Low groans of steel, shifts in structural tension, patterns of stress. He exhaled slowly, the east column still taking pressure. Matteo leaned against the railing, breathing hard. We know that part already. Marcus shook his head. No, it's worse now. Rourke's stomach tightened. How much worse? Marcus looked down the stairwell. If the pressure keeps climbing, the building's going to try compensating again. Matteo frowned. Meaning what? Marcus stepped back into motion, descending 2 steps at a time, meaning the system will redirect structural load toward the central support frame. Rourke followed him quickly. And that's bad because Marcus didn't slow because the lobby sits under that frame. Matteo swore under his breath and pushed himself to keep up. They reached the ground-level landing moments later. The heavy fire door leading into the main lobby stood partially sealed, locked halfway down by the automated containment system. Marcus grabbed the edge of the metal panel and pulled. It resisted. Rourke stepped forward and helped, forcing the door upward with a harsh scraping sound, just enough space to slip through. Marcus ducked under first. The lobby beyond looked eerily quiet. Huge glass windows framed the winter skyline outside, but inside the vast marble floor stood nearly empty. Most employees had already been pushed into sealed safety zones by the lockdown system. Only a handful of security guards remained behind the main desk, arguing over radios that weren't cooperating. One of them looked up as Marcus emerged. Hey, this area is restricted. Marcus ignored him. His eyes scanned the open space immediately. Reception desk. Glass staircase. Central atrium. No child. Rourke came through the door behind him. Where's Leela? He demanded. The security guard shook his head helplessly. Last we saw, she walked toward the atrium. Marcus turned. The atrium rose like a glass canyon in the center of the building. 40 stories of steel beams and balconies spiraling upward toward the skylight far above and running straight through the middle of that structure, the east support column. Marcus stepped slowly toward it. Above them, the steel frame creaked again. This time the sound was sharper, more strained. Rourke followed his gaze. Tell me that's normal. Marcus didn't respond. His attention had shifted. Near the base of the column, beside the large decorative fountain, a small backpack sat on the floor, covered in glittery stars. Matteo whispered behind them, as that. Marcus was already moving. He crossed the marble floor quickly, kneeling beside the backpack. Inside the front pocket sat a small tablet, still playing a cartoon at low volume, and beside it, a crumpled paper drawing. Marcus unfolded it carefully. A tall building, 2 stick figures, one big, one small, the same drawing style Sophie used. His chest tightened slightly. Rourke approached cautiously. That hers nodded once. She can't be far. Rourke grabbed his radio again. All units searched the lobby perimeter immediately. Static answered him again. Communications were collapsing along with the building systems. Marcus stood slowly, his eyes swept across the atrium again. Then he heard something soft, faint, a small voice echoing from behind the massive column. Hello. Marcus turned instantly. He walked around the curved steel base and there she was. Leela Harcourt sat cross-legged on the floor beside the fountain, staring up at the towering glass ceiling. She brightened the moment she saw him. Oh, hi. Marcus exhaled in quiet relief. There you are. The girl stood and ran toward him. I was looking for you, she said happily. Roar stared in disbelief. You know him. Leela nodded enthusiastically. He fixes the lights when they flicker. Marcus crouched to her level. You shouldn't wander off during alarms, she shrugged. It got boring upstairs. Before Marcus could respond, a loud metallic crack echoed from the atrium frame above them. Everyone froze. The east column shifted just slightly, but enough to make the steel groan like a wounded animal. Marcus's eyes shot upward. That wasn't stress anymore. That was movement. Real movement. Rourke followed his gaze. Marcus. Marcus stood slowly. If that column shifts another inch, Matteo whispered behind them. What happens? Marcus didn't look away from the towering steel structure. The lobby becomes the collapse point, and suddenly every second mattered. The steel above them groaned again. Not a loud noise this time, just a long, aching creak that echoed through the glass atrium like something massive slowly shifting its weight. Marcus didn't blink. His eyes tracked the support column from the marble floor all the way to the skylight 40 stories above. The bend was subtle, barely visible, but to someone who understood structural tension, it looked like a warning written in steel. Rourke swallowed. Tell me that column isn't actually moving, Marcus answered without looking down. It is. Matteo's voice cracked. Buildings don't just move. Marcus exhaled slowly. They do when pressure has nowhere else to go. Leela looked up at them, confused. Why is the building making that sound? Marcus crouched beside her. It's just tired, he said gently. Big buildings get tired sometimes. She nodded thoughtfully, accepting the explanation the way children accept things adults say with quiet confidence. Another metallic groan rolled through the atrium. This one louder. Dust drifted from a beam above. Rourke's voice tightened. How long do we have? Marcus studied the column carefully. Seconds stretched. Then he answered, maybe 10 minutes. Matteo's knees nearly buckled. 10 minutes before what? Marcus finally looked at him. Before the load transfer hits critical stress, Matteo blinked. Meaning Marcus didn't soften it, meaning the column could buckle. Silence crashed into the lobby. Roark ran both hands over his face. Hundreds of people are sealed inside this building. Marcus nodded once, which is why we need to stop the load transfer. Rourke stared at him. You're talking like you've done this before. Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he walked toward the fountain where the base of the column met the marble floor. Kneeling, he pressed his palm against the metal surface. The vibration told him everything. Pressure cycles, structural oscillation and one very specific weakness forming along the east brace. Marcus stood again. The problem isn't the column, he said quietly. Rourke frowned. Then what is? Marcus pointed upward. The containment system sealed the ventilation shafts that trapped heat and pressure in the wrong structural channels. Matteo stared blankly. So, we just reopened the vents. Marcus shook his head. Automatic lockdown disabled manual overrides. Rourke cursed under his breath. So, we're stuck. Marcus's gaze shifted toward the mechanical service corridor across the lobby. No. Rourke followed his eyes. You've got an idea. Marcus nodded slightly. There's a manual pressure bypass built into the original structural design. Matteo's eyebrows shot up. There is. Marcus started walking toward the corridor. Older towers used them as emergency fail-safes before automated systems got smarter. Rourke hurried beside him. And where exactly is this bypass? Marcus pushed open the maintenance door leading into the service tunnel right under the lobby foundation. Matteo groaned. Of course it is. The tunnel smelled of oil and cold steel. Pipes ran along the ceiling while thick cables snaked through metal brackets along the walls. Marcus moved through the narrow space with practiced ease. Rourke noticed immediately. You know this layout better than our own engineers. Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he stopped beside a large steel access hatch embedded in the floor. He knelt and brushed dust off the metal plate. Stamped across its surface were faded letters. Structural pressure control. Matteo leaned over his shoulder. I've worked here 2 years and never even knew that existed. Marcus grabbed the manual wheel latch. That's because modern engineers stopped teaching people how to use them. Rourke crouched beside him. Can it stop the column from buckling? Marcus looked up. For a while, Matteo's voice trembled. How long is a while? Marcus pulled the hatch open with a heavy clang, long enough to evacuate the lobby. Rourke exhaled. Then do it. Marcus climbed down into the narrow service shaft beneath the floor. Cold air rushed upward from the chamber below. Thick hydraulic valves lined the walls around a massive pressure regulator. Wheel. Marcus studied it for a moment. Then his hands moved, precise, efficient, like someone who had worked with systems like this many times before. Above them, the column groaned again. Rourke glanced toward the lobby entrance nervously. Marcus, we don't have much time. Marcus tightened the valve slowly. Pressure gauges along the wall began shifting. Matteo stared. How do you even know which valve does what? Marcus didn't look up. Because this building was designed by engineers trained with military emergency protocols, Rourke frowned. And you know that because Marcus paused. Then he gave the wheel another powerful turn. Above them, the column's vibration softened slightly. Just a little. Marcus finally spoke. Because I used to teach those protocols. Rourke's eyes widened. You what? Marcus looked up from the regulator. His voice remained calm. I wasn't always a maintenance worker. And for the first time since the alarms began, the people around him realized they had no idea who Marcus Hale really was. Rourke stared down into the service shaft, the dim emergency lights casting long shadows over the metal ladder where Marcus stood beside the pressure regulator. You used to teach those protocols, Rourke repeated slowly. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he kept turning the massive wheel valve, steady and controlled. The hydraulic system groaned in response, and the pressure gauges along the wall flickered as numbers began to drop. Above them, the steel column released a long, strained creak. Not gone, but easing. Matteo leaned over the edge of the shaft, eyes wide. You're telling me the maintenance guy who changes light bulbs used to train structural engineers? Marcus wiped a thin line of grease from his hand. Something like that. Rourke crouched beside the opening. Something like that, he echoed. Marcus gave the valve another precise adjustment. You ever hear of emergency structural response training for high-rise evacuation systems? Rourke frowned. Military version. Marcus nodded once. Matteo blinked. Military. Marcus stepped off the ladder and checked the regulator gauges. The vibration in the pipes had softened. The system was redistributing pressure again. This time through the bypass channel he had opened. But the numbers were still climbing. Not fast yet not stopping either. He spoke calmly. This buys us time. That's all. Rourke's voice tightened. How much time? Marcus studied the gauges for another second. 5 minutes. Matteo nearly laughed in disbelief. 5 minutes. You said 10 earlier. Marcus climbed back up the ladder and stepped onto the service tunnel floor. That was before the column started shifting. Rourke ran both hands through his hair. Great. Fantastic. Above them, another metallic crack echoed faintly through the building. Marcus turned toward the corridor again. Lobby evacuation needs to happen now. Rourke nodded and grabbed his radio. All lobby personnel begin evacuation procedures immediately. Static responded. Then the same frustrated security voice crackled back. Director, we still can't access the elevators or the east corridor doors. System sealed tight, Rourke swore. Marcus had already started walking back toward the lobby. Rourke followed quickly. So, what's the plan now, Professor? Marcus pushed open the maintenance door and stepped into the atrium again. The column still stood, but the faint bend along its spine looked slightly worse than before. Leela sat near the fountain again, swinging her legs while watching the flashing emergency lights. She brightened the moment she saw Marcus. You came back. Marcus crouched beside her. Told you I would. Rourke spoke quietly behind them. The nearest safe zone is the west staircase. Marcus nodded. Then we move her there. Matteo pointed nervously upward. Ah, what? About the rest of the building? Marcus stood slowly. That's the CEO's decision. Rourke frowned. What do you mean? Marcus looked toward the sealed elevator bank. The lockdown system requires executive override to release evacuation zones. Rourke's stomach sank. Vivian. Marcus nodded. She's the only one who can unlock the tower. Rourke paced a few steps across the marble floor. She's 40 floors up in the conference suite. Matteo rubbed his temples. And the elevators are dead. Marcus looked toward the massive spiral staircase along the atrium wall. Not all paths are closed. Rourke followed his gaze. That staircase goes straight to the executive levels. Marcus nodded again. Rourke turned toward Lila. If we take her up there, we reach the CEO faster. Marcus's voice stayed calm. Or we take her down the west stairs and get her out first. Rourke hesitated. Both options carried risk. Matteo looked at the bending column nervously. We don't have time for debate. Lila tugged gently on Marcus's sleeve. Are we playing a game? Marcus knelt beside her again. Something like that. She smiled. I like games. Marcus stood. His mind was already running through possibilities. Structural pressure rising, evacuation blocked, executive override needed, and a child standing beneath the most dangerous point in the tower. He turned to Rourke. Here's the reality. Rourke waited. Marcus spoke evenly. If the CEO doesn't unlock the building soon, people above the pressure zones won't be able to evacuate before the frame shifts. Matteo whispered. How bad would that be? Marcus didn't sugarcoat it. Rourke looked toward the towering staircase again. 40 floors manual climb during a structural emergency. He exhaled slowly. Then we get the CEO. Marcus nodded. But Lila doesn't climb 40 floors in a collapsing building. Rourke looked down at the little girl. No. Marcus reached out and took her small hand. We take her to the west stairwell first. That gets her out of the collapse zone. Rourke nodded. Then we go up. Marcus gave one last glance at the groaning column. Every instinct in his body told him the clock had started ticking faster. He squeezed Lia's hand gently. All right, kiddo. She looked up at him. Where are we going? Marcus smiled faintly. To find your mom. And if they didn't reach her in time, the entire tower would learn the hard way why the quiet janitor had once been trusted with far bigger disasters. Marcus tightened his grip on Lila's hand as they crossed the wide marble lobby toward the west corridor. Rourke walked ahead, scanning the hallways while Matteo stayed close behind, glancing nervously at the towering column that creaked every few seconds. The sound followed them like a warning. Steel complaining under weight. The building still shifting. Move, Rourke urged. West stairwell is just past the security checkpoint. Marcus nodded, guiding Lila carefully over the polished floor. She skipped beside him, blissfully unaware of the tension tightening every adult in the room. Is Mom mad? She asked suddenly. Marcus glanced down. Why would she be? Because I left the lounge. Marcus considered that. Parents worry, he said gently. Doesn't mean they're mad. Rourke pushed open the west corridor door. The hallway beyond was dim, lit only by emergency strips along the baseboards. The lockdown system had sealed the main lobby exits, but the west stairwell remained accessible for emergency descent. Rourke checked the heavy metal door ahead. Good, he said. Still unlocked, he pulled it open. Cold concrete air spilled out. Marcus crouched beside Lila again. Okay, kiddo. This staircase goes down to the street-level exit. She looked up the towering spiral of steps. That's a lot of stairs. Rourke forced a smile. You're brave, right? Lila nodded proudly. Very. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. There will be security guards outside. Stay with them until your mom comes. Lila frowned slightly. You're not coming. Marcus shook his head. I have to help some other people first. She thought about that. Then she hugged him quickly around the neck. Okay. Marcus blinked once in surprise, but returned the brief hug before setting her gently toward the stairwell. Rourke spoke into his radio. West exit security. Incoming child evacuation. CEO's daughter. Static answered. Then a relieved voice replied, copy that. We'll receive her. Rourke watched Lia begin her careful descent down the stairs. When she disappeared around the first turn, he slowly closed the door. The hallway fell silent again. Matteo exhaled loudly. Well, at least someone's getting out. Marcus turned back toward the lobby, and now we go up. Rourke looked toward the massive spiral staircase rising through the atrium. 40 floors, no elevators, and a building slowly shifting around them. Matteo groaned, I'm already tired just thinking about it. Marcus walked toward the base of the staircase. His expression remained calm, but his mind was racing through the structural map of the tower again. The pressure bypass he opened downstairs would slow the collapse, but not stop it. The building still needed full evacuation, and that required one thing. Vivian Harcourt stepped beside him. You really think she'll listen? Marcus looked upward at the endless steps winding toward the executive floors. She'll listen when she realizes what's happening. Matteo shook his head. She fired you this morning. Marcus started climbing. Then maybe she'll listen faster. Rourke followed. The staircase echoed with their footsteps as they climbed through the open atrium. From this angle, the column looked even worse. A subtle bend along its length, a slow ripple of tension passing through the steel every few seconds. Marcus kept counting the vibration silently. Every one of them told him the same thing. The clock was shrinking. Matteo huffed behind them. I swear if we survive this, I'm transferring to a building with fewer floors. Rourke almost laughed. Almost. But the sound died when another loud crack echoed through the atrium above them. Dust drifted downward like gray snow. Marcus didn't stop climbing. His voice remained steady. Column stress just increased again. Rourke wiped sweat from his forehead. Of course it did. They passed the 10th floor. Then the 15th. Each level looked eerily deserted behind the glass corridors. Locked down doors sealed hallways. Employees waited inside protected zones, watching the flashing emergency lights with growing fear. Matteo glanced into one office through the glass wall. They're trapped. Marcus nodded. Until the CEO unlocks the system. Rourke climbed beside him. We're halfway there. Marcus didn't respond. He was listening again. The building spoke through vibrations running up the steel staircase. Different from before, sharper, more uneven. He stopped suddenly on the 22nd floor landing. Rourke nearly collided with him. What now? Marcus rested his hand on the railing, feeling the tremor, his expression darkened slightly. That pressure bypassed downstairs. Matteo swallowed. What about it? Marcus looked upward toward the executive floors. It's not holding as long as it should. Rourke's stomach tightened. How much time do we have now? Marcus exhaled quietly. Less than 5 minutes. Matteo groaned. Fantastic. Marcus started climbing again. Faster now. The higher they went, the more the tower groaned. Steel shifting. Concrete grinding. The sound of a structure struggling to keep its balance. They reached the 35th floor when Rourke's radio crackled again. Director, this is penthouse security. Rourke grabbed it quickly. This is Rourke. The guard's voice sounded tense. CEO Harcourt wants to know why half the building alarms are going off. Rourke looked at Marcus. Then he answered the radio. Tell her we're coming. Marcus climbed the next step. And for the first time that day, the woman who fired him was about to learn exactly who she had dismissed. Marcus took the next set of steps 2 at a time. The air was thinner up here, warmer from the trapped heat circulating through sealed ventilation channels. Each landing they passed echoed with the distant groan of the tower's steel skeleton struggling under uneven pressure. Rourke checked his watch. 4 minutes, he said. Marcus didn't answer. He was counting the vibrations again. Every 20 seconds, the column shuddered slightly. Every tremor meant the structural load was creeping closer to failure. Matteo stumbled on the step behind them. Who designs a building this tall without a manual override that works during an emergency? Marcus replied without looking back. People who believe systems never fail. Rourke glimpsed Vivian Harcourt. They climbed past the 36th floor. Glass conference rooms stretched along the hallway behind sealed lockdown doors. Inside, executives and assistants stood clustered together, watching the staircase with wide eyes. Marcus caught a few of their gazes as he passed. Some recognized him, a maintenance worker sprinting through the executive levels during an emergency. None of them understood why. They reached the 38th landing when another violent crack echoed above them. The entire staircase trembled. Matteo grabbed the railing. That one sounded bad. Marcus nodded. It was Rourke swallowed. How bad? Marcus finally slowed. The east column just shifted again. Matteo whispered. Is that survivable? Marcus didn't soften the answer. Depends how fast we move. Rourke pushed ahead toward the final flight of stairs. Then let's move. They climbed the last 2 levels quickly. The penthouse corridor opened before them. Wide glass walls, polished floors, and expensive artwork lining the hall. A pair of security guards stood outside the conference suite doors. Both looked stunned when they saw the group approaching. Director, one guard said. Rowe didn't slow down. Open the door. The guard hesitated. Ma'am is in the middle of Rourke pushed past him and threw the door open. Inside the conference room, a dozen investors sat around a long glass table. Vivian Harcourt stood at the head of it mid-sentence. Temporary systems malfunction, but Harcourt Technologies has. She stopped. The entire room turned toward the sudden interruption. Vivian's eyes locked onto Marcus. For a split second, confusion crossed her face. Then recognition, the maintenance worker she had fired that morning, standing in her boardroom during an emergency. Her expression hardened instantly. "What is he doing here?" she demanded. Rourke stepped forward. "Vivian, we have a structural problem." She folded her arms. "I'm aware of the alarms." Marcus stepped forward calmly. "It's more than alarms." Vivian turned toward him sharply. "I wasn't speaking to you." Marcus didn't react. "The east support column is taking uneven structural load due to containment lockdown," he said evenly. One of the investors frowned. "What does that mean?" Marcus met the man's eyes. "It means the building's pressure systems are working against themselves." Vivian scoffed. "My engineers designed those systems." Marcus nodded. "They did." Then he added quietly. "But the emergency sequence wasn't meant to activate during coolant pressure imbalance." Rourke watched Vivian carefully. She hated being challenged, especially publicly. Her gaze returned to Marcus. "You were dismissed this morning," she said coldly. "Yes, so why are you still in my building?" Marcus didn't raise his voice. "Because your building is about 4 minutes away from structural failure." The room went silent. Vivian stared at him. Then she laughed, not amused. Dismissive. "That's ridiculous." Marcus stepped toward the window overlooking the atrium. He pointed downward. "Look at the east column." Reluctantly, several executives stood and approached the glass. From the penthouse view, the subtle bend in the column was unmistakable. One of the investors went pale. Vivian's smile disappeared. Marcus continued calmly. "Your lockdown protocol sealed ventilation shafts, trapping pressure in the wrong channels. My bypass downstairs slowed it, but not enough." Roar blinked. "You opened the pressure regulator." Marcus nodded. Vivian turned sharply. "You tampered with my building systems." Marcus met her gaze. "I kept them from collapsing." Matteo spoke quietly from the doorway. For now, the room filled with uneasy whispers. Vivian looked from the column to Marcus. For the first time that day, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Marcus spoke again. "Hundreds of people are sealed in pressure zones," Rourke added. "And your daughter was in the lobby." Vivian's head snapped toward him. Was Marcus nodded. "She's safe now." Vivian's shoulders relaxed slightly. Then her expression hardened again. "What exactly are you asking for?" Marcus stepped closer to the conference table. "Executive override." Vivian frowned. "To do what?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Unlock the building." The investors exchanged worried glances. Vivian looked toward the bending column again. Then back at the quiet man she had fired hours earlier. The man who now stood in her boardroom explaining how to save her tower. And suddenly she wasn't quite as certain of her authority as she had been that morning. The conference room stayed silent. Every investor at the glass table stared through the towering windows at the east column running down the atrium. From this height, the bend was undeniable, subtle, but wrong in a way that made the stomach tighten. Vivian Harcourt didn't speak for several seconds. Her arms remained folded, but the confidence that had filled the room minutes earlier was gone. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that my building is about to collapse." Marcus shook his head. "No." A ripple of relief passed through the investors. Then he finished the sentence. "I'm telling you it will if you don't unlock the evacuation system." Rourke stepped beside him. "Security teams can't move people while lockdown is active." Vivian's gaze moved between them. "You expect me to believe the word of a maintenance worker who broke into my boardroom?" Marcus didn't react. He simply pointed toward the atrium again. At that exact moment, the column groaned loud, even through the thick conference glass. Several executives flinched. Matteo whispered from the doorway. "That's new." Marcus spoke calmly. "That sound means the load transfer is accelerating." One investor stood abruptly. "What happens if that column buckles?" Marcus met his eyes. "The lobby collapses first." Another investor swallowed. "And the rest of the tower." Marcus didn't soften it. "Depends how fast we evacuate." All eyes shifted back to Vivian. She walked slowly toward the window. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Sharp blazer, perfect posture, the image of absolute control. But outside the window, her tower was groaning. For the first time since the alarm began, Vivian looked uncertain. Marcus spoke quietly behind her. "The system you built is doing exactly what it was designed to do." She turned toward him. "And you're saying it's wrong?" Marcus shook his head. I'm saying it doesn't understand this situation. Rourke added. Only you can override the lockdown. Vivian studied Marcus carefully now. Not as a nuisance, not as a fired employee, but as a variable she hadn't accounted for. You claim to know how to stabilize the tower, she said. Marcus answered honestly. No, the room tensed. I can buy time, he continued. Enough to get people out, and then Marcus looked toward the column again. Then the engineers can repair the damage. Vivian paced slowly around the table. You expect me to unlock the entire building based on your analysis? Marcus nodded. Yes. One of the investors spoke nervously. Vivian, the column. She held up a hand, silencing him. Her eyes stayed on Marcus. You said the tower has 4 minutes. Marcus checked the faint tremor running through the floor beneath his feet. Closer to 3 now. Rourke stepped forward urgently. Vivian. She ignored him. Her attention remained locked on Marcus. You walked into my executive floor this morning without authorization. Marcus didn't deny it. You were dismissed. Yes. And yet you're here telling me how to run my building. Marcus shrugged slightly. Right now it's not your building that matters. Vivian's eyes narrowed. Then what does? Marcus answered simply. The people inside it. Silence returned. Heavy. The kind of silence that decides things. Another metallic crack echoed through the tower. Dust drifted past the conference windows like gray snow, one investor whispered. Vivian. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, the arrogance that had defined her earlier was gone, replaced by something sharper. Decision. Vivian walked to the wall console beside the conference door. The emergency control panel glowed red. Executive override requires biometric confirmation, she said quietly. Marcus nodded. Then we're ready. She placed her hand on the scanner. The system chimed. Voice authorization required. Vivian leaned toward the microphone. Vivian Harcourt, CEO, authorization code Alpha 79. The console beeped again. Building lockdown protocol detected. Override. Vivian hesitated. Just for a second. Marcus watched the column outside the window tremble again. Rourke whispered urgently. Vivian. She pressed the confirmation button. A loud electronic tone echoed through the tower. Across 40 floors, sealed doors unlocked. Elevators rebooted. Emergency corridors opened. The atrium lights shifted from red to white. Marcus exhaled slowly. Evacuation had begun. Rourke grabbed his radio immediately. All units began full evacuation. Move everyone out now. Below them, hundreds of employees poured into hallways as lockdown barriers lifted. But Marcus didn't celebrate. He was still watching the column. Because something about the vibration hadn't stopped. Matteo noticed his expression. What now? Marcus spoke quietly. That bypass downstairs was never meant to hold this much load. Rourke froze. Meaning Marcus looked at him. It's going to fail. Vivian turned sharply. How long? Marcus listened to the steel again. The column groaned once more. Then he answered. About 60 seconds. And suddenly the evacuation wasn't just urgent. It was a race. The tower shuddered again. This time, the vibration rolled through the penthouse floor like distant thunder under the glass. Marcus didn't move from the window. His eyes tracked the east column all the way down the atrium as emergency lights across the tower shifted from red to white. Evacuation had begun, but it was chaos. Below them, office doors were flying open as hundreds of employees poured into stairwells and corridors. Rourke's radio erupted with overlapping voices. Security Team 3 moving employees from level 20. West stairwell overloaded, redirecting traffic. Elevators back online but running slow. Rourke barked into the radio. Keep them moving. No stops. Marcus listened to the column again. The vibration had changed faster now, sharper. Matteo noticed immediately. You're doing that listening thing. Again. Marcus nodded slightly because the tower's telling me something. Vivian crossed the room quickly. What now? Marcus turned toward her. The pressure bypass downstairs is about to fail. Rourke stiffened. You said we had a minute. Marcus looked back at the column. Closer to 40 seconds now. One of the investors stood abruptly. We need to leave. Rourke shook his head. Stairwells are still clearing. If we rush now, we'll jam the evacuation. The investor stared at him. So, we just wait for the building to collapse. Marcus stepped toward the conference table. No. Everyone looked at him. Marcus pointed at the digital blueprint display mounted along the wall. The emergency system had automatically pulled up a structural map of the tower during the evacuation sequence. Marcus tapped the east column on the screen. This is where the load is concentrating. Then he pointed to another section slightly higher, and this is where the frame will try to redistribute it once the bypass fails. Vivian frowned. That area holds the atrium cross brace. Marcus nodded. Yes. Matteo blinked. Which is bad, right? Marcus looked at him. If that brace absorbs the pressure suddenly, it will snap. Rourke ran a hand over his face. And when that happens, Marcus spoke calmly, the column will straighten. Matteo almost laughed. That sounds like a good thing. Marcus shook his head. Not if it does it violently. Vivian understood first. The energy release would destabilize the whole frame. Marcus nodded. Yes. Silence filled the room again. Rourke asked the question everyone feared. So, what do we do? Marcus studied the blueprint again. Then he looked at the staircase leading down from the penthouse. We shift the load. Matteo stared. How exactly do you move the weight of a 40-story building? Marcus tapped a second section of the blueprint. The west structural channel. Vivian stepped closer. That system only activates during seismic events. Marcus nodded. Yes. Rourke blinked. You're saying we trigger the earthquake stabilizers. Marcus looked toward the emergency console. Exactly. Vivian crossed her arms. That system redistributes weight across the entire frame. It's extremely sensitive. Marcus met her gaze. It's also our only option. Another loud crack echoed from the atrium below. Everyone turned toward the window. The east column bent another fraction of an inch. Matteo whispered, that doesn't look good. Marcus turned back to Vivian. The stabilizer controls are on the main console. She hesitated. That system wasn't designed to be triggered manually, Marcus replied quietly. Neither was this emergency. Rourke checked his watch. 20 seconds, Vivian looked between the screen, the column, and Marcus. Hours earlier, she had fired him for standing on the wrong floor. Now, he was the only person in the room who understood how to keep the tower standing. Marcus didn't push. He simply waited, because the building wasn't waiting. Another metallic crack echoed upward. Dust drifted past the windows again. Rourke's voice dropped. Vivian, she turned toward the console. Her fingers hovered over the seismic control switch. If this fails, she said quietly, we lose the tower. Marcus nodded. If we don't try, we lose the people inside it. Vivian inhaled slowly. Then she flipped the switch. Deep inside the building, massive stabilizer pistons activated. A heavy mechanical rumble surged through the tower. Marcus turned toward the window again. The east column trembled violently, then slowly, painfully. The bend began to ease. Matteo's eyes widened. It's working. Marcus exhaled quietly. For the first time since the alarms began, the steel above the atrium stopped groaning. The tower stabilized. Rourke grabbed the radio again. All units continue evacuation. Structure is stabilizing. Cheers. And relieved voices crackled through the channel. Vivian leaned heavily against the console. Her tower still stood, and the quiet man she had fired that morning had just saved it. For several seconds, no one in the penthouse conference room moved. The building was still humming, but the violent groaning that had filled the atrium minutes earlier had faded into a deep mechanical rumble as the seismic stabilizers continued redistributing the structural load. Marcus stood near the window, watching the east column carefully. The bend that had threatened to snap the tower apart was slowly straightening as the pressure spread across the building's frame. Rourke's radio buzzed again. Director, west stairwells are clearing. Most floors are already empty. Rourke let out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Copy that. Keep moving everyone out. Matteo leaned against the glass table, laughing softly in disbelief. I cannot believe that just worked. Marcus finally stepped back from the window. It worked because the stabilizers were designed for worst-case scenarios, he said calmly. This just happened to qualify. One of the investors approached the glass cautiously and looked down the 40-story atrium. Below them, employees streamed toward exits in organized lines as security guided them outside. No collapse, the man whispered. Incredible. Vivian Harcourt remained beside the emergency console. Her hand still rested on the seismic override switch. Slowly, she turned toward Marcus. For the first time since he had entered the room, she didn't look angry. She looked thoughtful. You said you used to teach structural emergency protocols, she said quietly. Marcus nodded. I did. Rourke raised an eyebrow. You're going to leave it at that. Marcus gave a faint smile. Retired Military Infrastructure Response Unit, he said. We trained engineers how to keep buildings standing during disasters. Matteo blinked. So the maintenance guy who fixes our lights used to teach people how to stop skyscrapers from collapsing. Marcus shrugged lightly. Life changes. Vivian studied him carefully. Hours earlier, she had dismissed him as an inconvenience. Now the entire boardroom knew the truth. One of the investors spoke quietly from behind the table. Vivian, if he hadn't intervened. I know, she said. Silence settled over the room again. Outside the window, emergency vehicles were beginning to arrive at the building entrance as evacuation crews secured the perimeter. Rourke checked the radio again. Last evacuation teams leaving level 12, he reported. Marcus nodded. Good. Vivian stepped away from the console and walked slowly across the conference room floor. Her heels echoed softly in the quiet space. She stopped a few feet from Marcus. This morning, she said, I fired you. Marcus didn't argue. You did. She looked toward the window again. And this afternoon you saved my building. Marcus shook his head. I saved the people inside it. Vivian gave a small nod. Then she extended her hand. It was a simple gesture, but the entire room understood what it meant. Recognition, respect, and a public admission that the quiet man she had dismissed was worth far more than she had believed. Marcus looked at her hand for a moment. Then he shook it. Rourke grinned slightly. Guess that means he's rehired. Vivian glanced toward the security director. Not quite. Everyone looked at her. She turned back to Marcus. You clearly don't belong in maintenance. Marcus smiled faintly. I didn't mind it. She folded her arms again, but this time the gesture wasn't arrogant. It was thoughtful. Hardcore technologies could use someone who understands both systems and people. Matteo whispered to Rourke, that sounds suspiciously like a job offer. Rourke chuckled quietly. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the staircase leading down the atrium. Somewhere outside that building, his daughter Sophie was probably waiting for him, wondering why he was late. He exhaled softly. We'll talk about it, he said. Vivian nodded once. Fair enough. The emergency crews outside continued guiding employees away from the tower as structural engineers began preparing inspections. But inside the conference room, the balance of power had already shifted. The man who had entered the tower as an overlooked janitor was leaving as the person everyone now understood had saved them all. And sometimes that's how real strength works. It doesn't shout. It waits quietly until the moment the world needs it most. If you enjoyed this story, ask me for the next story title. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. The billionaire mocked the quiet mechanic at his own factory until the machine stopped listening. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?